Welcome to this week's Oregon Minute. Today we are interviewing Steve Zach, who is the Oregon School Board president, but not for much longer as he's decided to step down and not pursue re-election. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
We're very happy to have you. I wanted to really quickly, before we get into what made you decide not to pursue re-election, let's reflect on your career a little bit. It is my understanding that you've been on the school board since 1999 and then president since 2016. So I'm curious, what did you do before you became involved with the school board in general?
Sure. Thanks. Well, I graduated from law school in 1983, and in 1984, my wife and I moved into Oregon. And I grew up here and went to high school here. But we moved back in 84, and between then and 1999, I helped found and run Oregon Youth Baseball. And so I was involved in a lot of that community service through that organization. I was a baseball umpire at that time as well. So I found ways to keep myself busy before getting on the school board.
So then what prompted your involvement in the school board? What made you want to run for a position back then?
Actually, I was appointed. The way I got on the board, I was appointed in 1998. I served on a committee on the board. I'd also been doing mock trial work. So I know Paul Zwicker's daughter really well because she was on my team. So I was in school a lot, working with the mock trial team for 23 years with Brian Root. So I was involved in school that way. But in 1998, the district wanted to move away from the way it allocated the representation on the board. We were geographic districts, and at that time, Fitchburg had two representatives, and the superintendent at that time wanted to move that down to one to better reflect the population apportionment between the areas on the school board. And that was fairly controversial because the seat that was going to be removed was somebody who was pretty frequently a pain in the side of the superintendent and administration. So there was a task force created to review the apportionment of the school district seats, and I was on that and served on that. And then shortly after that report was generated, Kathy Maves, who was a board member from one of the Oregon seats, stepped down from the board. She and her husband were moving, and there was 1 year left on her seat or on her term. And I got a call from Chuck Teeter, who had recently stepped down as school board president, and he encouraged me to apply for that seat. So I talked it over with our family, and wasn't working full time in youth baseball anymore. And they encouraged me to apply, and I applied, and I got on for the 1 year seat. So that's how that started. So that's why 22 years will be the end in April. It's 7 years of 3 year terms plus that 1 year at the very beginning.
So then from 1999 to 2016, before you became president?
Yeah, I managed to avoid that for 18 years. So that was.
What do you think were some of your major accomplishments between that time frame?
I got asked that last time I ran, which was unopposed. I said, what are you most proud of your service on the district? And what really says it all is that when people tell you they moved to Oregon because of the quality of the schools and the school system. So that's what I'm most proud of, is that we're a place that people come to because the school district's good. So you can look at building projects. I mean, that's a tangible sign of progress. It's not the be and end all, but during the terms that I was on the board, we built roam corners or Rome Corners, the intermediate school, and we did a substantial renovation to all of our buildings, at least 5 or 6 of them, a few years ago, including the high school edition and JC Park East, and then Forest Edge. So, from a building standpoint, we've done a lot of things during that time. But educationally, we've really moved forward in the educational paradigm toward what we called back then was a 21st century model. So you can look back on the papers that we've authored as a district during the time, and that really sets a progressive arch for our district. And I'm really proud of that work and the board's guidance of the district from a really high level policy standpoint. Yeah, and finally, I mean, one of the board's most important roles is to select the person who's going to guide the district. That would be our superintendent, because we delegate operational items to our superintendent to run the district. And during my tenure on the board, we hired Brian Bustler, who was extremely successful and was here for 14 years. And we just hired Dr. Leslie Bergstrom, and she's phenomenal. And I would be very surprised if she didn't have an equally successful and long term stint here as superintendent. Really proud of those two processes.
So then, what was the thing that prompted you to pursue the president position?
Um, I don't think I really pursued it. Okay. It just happened to be the right time for me as one of the 7 board members to take that role. Who the board selects as president depends on the nature of the board and the personalities and who you are as a board member. For a long time, I was pretty vocal. I'm still pretty vocal, but I was one of the first one's in the conversation, and people say I'm fairly opinionated on topics. And so you need board members who start conversation and prompt conversation and ask tough questions. And that's not the role of the board president. Okay, the board president has a much different role in terms of facilitating the meeting and also facilitating the team of board members. And so I wasn't right for that role for a long, long time. And when we got to 2016, it became the right time. I think it was the right person on that board, ready to change my role in terms of how I participated in board meetings, and I think the board was ready for me to be a board president in that changed role. So it wasn't. I didn't. Would have been more than happy not to be board president and serve that other role, but I thought I was ready to take a different leadership role on the board.
So it sounded like a very natural progression. But then, in the 4 years you have been president, I think the answer to this question is obvious, but did you ever anticipate that you would be helping to lead the district or helping the district to navigate a global pandemic?
Well, not this specifically. I mean, this is joking with Brian Bustler before he stepped down. We both sort of hoped that the back end of our careers with the district would have been, kind of a glide path in. But if you go back and read one of the first board paper was the board, well before I got on the board, one of their policy statements that in this district change is status quo. And nothing's been truer than that, is that you can have a plan and you can follow it, but there's always going to be something that comes up either daily or weekly or monthly that's gonna push against that plan, and take you a little bit off the course that you had intended to go. And so that's just the normal course of things. So you anticipate that. No, obviously we didn't anticipate the type of structural disruption that we've had with COVID-19. So, but being in a position where you anticipate that makes you a little bit better able to navigate through it.
Do you think that that played a role in the decision to step down, or what overall prompted that decision?
No, it has nothing to do with this last year. Absolutely not. I mean, I really thought hard 3 years ago when I ran for reelection about not running, and I was ready at that time too. But there were some things that needed to be done in these last 3 years that I wanted to see accomplished, and so had always intended, and I think I've said since I got reelected and appointed president that I would not be running at the end of this term. So the COVID thing had nothing to do with it.
It was one of those things, kind of like you say, it was a natural progression into the role, and what I'm hearing is it sounds like a natural, it just sounds like the right time. That's what I'm
Yeah,
getting.
I mean, 3 years ago, I wanted to, we knew we had the growth task force working, and we knew that we were going to have to go to referendum to get a new school ready within this 3 years. And so that was some significant work to walk through. So that had to get done. We had to finish the report, choose a bunch of different alternatives for land sites and configuration of the grades. We had to, guide a referendum through to successful passage and then secure financing and the design and construction. So I've been through that before, and we had a relatively young board, so I thought it was important for me to be on the board to walk through that process. And I knew Brian was planning on stepping down during that 3 years, and I was the only one that was on the board. Well, Courtney Orico had been on; she came back on the board, and she and I were the only ones who had been through a superintendent hire before, or replacement of a superintendent. So I thought that was important as well to walk through that. And then also, the board was young 3 years ago, and they're more experienced now, and I think ready to move forward. And at some point it becomes time. I mean, you just know it, and now it's time.
What lessons do you what are some maybe takeaways from navigating the district through this pandemic, and then all other challenges that the board has embraced, in the last, 4 years you've been
Yeah,
president?
I mean, a wise board president before me, Deidre Atkinson, cautioned us and instructed us when she retired that the proper role of the board is 30,000 feet up and 5 to 10 years out, as opposed to into the minutia of the daily. And that's really served the board well over the last 30 years, that type of mentality. And I think that's my same advice, keep understanding your role, and that you always are looking for the end game or the long term solution or answer, as opposed to reacting short term and in the moment. I mean, you've always got to look out from the seat of the board, because we don't run the day-to-day operations of the district. We hired people to do that. But in terms of where we're headed, don't get distracted by short-term stuff. Make sure you're on a consistent path long-term, and don't get off agenda from that.
So Steve, what is that next chapter for you?
Oh, I'll probably still do a lot of community service stuff and be involved, but somewhere where I'm not visible and out front. And yeah, I think in terms of my spare time, I'll do that. But my wife Patty's been through 22 years of without me around on Mondays, and the second Monday and the fourth Monday, and then expulsion hearings and committee meetings and that sort of stuff. So I actually have saved up my checks for the last couple terms, and she knows that those are going directly to going out to dinner on special nights to kind of compensate for those 20 years.
Before we conclude, what is one of your favorite memories from your last, not just the last 4 years, but since, 1999? What is one memory from your time on the board that you think you'll take with you?
Oh, there've been so many. I mean, one that springs to mind was when we were in the hiring process to replace Dr. Bustler. Um, we had a board that really was high functioning and really got along together well. We were very diverse in opinions. We read a lot of books together. During the year, we wrote a couple of really good papers. Visioning for the Future is just one of my favorite papers on there because, I mean, just looked at the new world. It was generated by Friedman's The World is Flat, and that just caused us to think. So that board thought aloud about what the world was going to look like that our kids were going to go into in the 21st century. And in large part, that book's been pretty accurate in terms of the changes. So that was a really, really fun board, a really dynamic time. And we were also in the process of replacing Linda Barrows. And the one moment I'll remember the most was we had completed the whole process, had just finished up a night of interviewing Dr. Bustler in a second interview for about 2.5, 3 hours, and we retired to a social setting just to unwind, and we didn't do anything with schoolwork, but just that hour of just talking with that group after having gone through a really intense process was a really fun night because we knew we had the next great leader of the district in hand, and so that was fun. That's the one night I'll remember. That makes up for all the nights of expulsion hearings, which are the worst nights, and
I
there
I,
were
I can imagine.
about 200 of them. So
It's I would imagine it's a lot to balance, because it's like you're balancing the emotions of a lot of different people.
there's going to be good tasks and not so good tasks that you have to do, and you just have to remember what the long game is. You asked me about the other moment. The other best moment happens every year at graduation. That's a pretty special moment when you get to give out diplomas to the students after their journey through high school here and see how excited everybody is. And that means you've been successful as a district and as a board and as a board member when you can send those 250 to 300 people out into the world and have a pretty good idea that they're going to be successful. Those Sundays in June were very special, and I missed this last one because we didn't have one. So I didn't get a quote unquote last one. So I feel really bad about that because that's a great moment. I feel
Well,
bad for the students who didn't get that.
yeah, but I do know that the community hosted that drive-by parade, which I thought was really
Pretty cool.
special for the
Yeah,
summer.
and in fact, Dr. Bergstrom and Principal Pliner and I were in our driveway watching them come by. So that was really cool. That was really fun.
Well, perhaps, Steve, perhaps there's always next year. Or,
Yeah,
depending on how long this pandemic lasts, there's always the year after
yeah,
that.
Emily, they're talking about keeping that as part of the annual routine, which would be really cool.
It would be like a commemorative, it's recalling like the history, the historical moment that we had to all go through as a collective and navigating this whole.
Yeah, yeah, but it's a broader community send off to the students other than just the ceremony, which typically is just the family and friends. But when a community can gather in the streets and celebrate that's pretty cool.
I
I,
agree.
I I hope that keeps organized and gets done. Maybe I can do that when I retire.
I will say that that makes for some great photos in the Observer, definitely.
Yeah, good. They were really good.
All right, Steve. Well, we've greatly enjoyed having you on the show. Before we conclude, though, is there any other little notes or comments that you'd like to share with us and our viewers regarding your time as president?
Just that none of the board members undertake this service for themselves, and I can tell you that board members I've served with all think it's an honor and a privilege to be able to serve the residents of this community, to run the school district. And so, I'll express the same thing, that it's been an amazing honor for 22 years to be entrusted with that responsibility. And I thank the community for allowing me to do that.
Well, thank you, Steve, once again for appearing on this week's episode.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Thanks for letting me have the opportunity to talk with you. It was good to meet you.
And as always, to our viewers, these episodes air every Thursday at 7 p.m. So be sure to tune in every week.